The courtroom was chilly, the air thick with tension. Each breath seemed to ring off the wooden walls of the courthouse. Reporters whispered, cameras popped outside, and the gallery was filled with worried faces. But in the middle of it all, sat one man, Kody Brown, the former proud head of a large family, now a defendant in the most agonizing trial of his life. The gavel came down. Court is now in session, and with the sound, the empire he had spent decades constructing started to erode. This was not a battle of law. This was a battle of truths. A platform where wounds were dug up, and where the people who used to call Kody dad and husband would tear him limb from limb. His wives were there. Christine, her eyes brimming with silent fury. Janelle, arms folded tightly. A fortress of strength, straining against the fury just contained. Meri, expressionless, struggling to keep the tempest inside. And Robyn, his supposed favorite wife, sat shaking, holding her hands as if in prayer that none of this was happening. But it was not the wives that day who wielded the power. It was the children. The same children who had once sought his counsel, now bore the truth as a weapon, poised and ready to strike. The first child emerged from the shadows, timid, quaking, but as brave as one needed to confront the man who had once dominated them. His voice broke as he told him, "My father wasn't the man you saw on television. He made us invisible. If we disobeyed, we didn't exist." The room changed. Gasp, whispers, journalists wrote faster. And in that instant, the fantasy broke. The children one by one revealed secrets that hurt more than any knife. A daughter told of how she was punished, not by brutality, but by emotional banishment. A son disclosed he had grown up as a soldier, not a child, having to obey orders rather than being permitted to dream. Another daughter sobbed her way through testifying, admitting she had pleaded for her father's attention, only to be silenced when she made her own choice. Each sentence cut deep, piercing Kody's carefully constructed portrait of a good father, and the courtroom knew it. This wasn't rage. This was sorrow. The children weren't testifying. They were finally freeing themselves. The wives sat silently, each one unraveling in their own manner. Christine's tears tracked across her cheek. But they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of recognition. She had endured this sorrow, and now she heard it repeated through her children. Janelle's fists balled tighter with each sentence. She had fought Kody for years, struggled for respect, and here it was evidence that it wasn't just her. It had always been the children as well. Meri sat stone-faced, her expression impossible to read. But deep within she was remembering all the solitary nights, all the chilly silences, every time Kody had given in to power over love. Even Robyn, the wife many believed Kody favored, seemed shaken. Her eyes welled with tears, her head lowered in shame. She had defended him for so long, but in this moment, even she couldn't deny the truth unraveling before her eyes. The silence between each testimony was deafening. It wasn't just a courtroom, it was a funeral. The death of the father figure they once believed in. When the moment finally arrived for Kody to say his piece, he stood like a man perched on the cliff's edge. His voice was biting, defensive, desperate. "They don't know what it's like to lead a family this large. I gave everything, for them." But his words didn't carry. They collapsed, hollow sounds against the heavy words already spoken. Then, and in a silence which stunned the judge, his older son yelled from the balcony, "You didn't give up for us. You gave us up." The audience exploded. The wives cried. The children wept openly. Even the reporters stopped, shocked by the emotion of it all. Kody's face was red with rage. Yet words were powerless to rescue him now. His reputation was crumbling live before their very eyes, not due to the strangers, but due to the silencer voices that he once used to muffle them. The judge inclined, eyes narrowing, voice icy and unshakable. "Mr. Brown, this court has heard enough. You assert sacrifice. You assert leadership. But what this court has heard is not sacrifice. It is suffering. It is not leadership. It is control. These children, your children, have testified with bravery. Their truth outweighs your defense." Each sentence was a nail in the coffin. You constructed a family on promises of unity, but you brought division. You constructed a home that was supposed to be loved, but you planted pain. And this court will not sit idly by while that legacy goes unchallenged. That sound wasn't just a verdict. It was a thunderclap, a blow that reverberated far beyond the courtroom's walls. As the families stood to depart, something amazing occurred. The wives, those former love competitors, proceeded out together, their children at their sides. Christine had an arm around her daughter. Janelle clutched her son's hand. Meri strode beside them with head held high. Even Robyn, trembling and wan, trailed behind. No longer were they broken women, bound together by one man's dream. They were survivors, bound by truth. And behind them Kody Brown sat. Alone, silent, vanquished. His kingdom of domination had collapsed. His children's voices had undone him. And the fall of the gavel had forever sealed his fate. Outside there were cameras waiting in line to do interviews. Headlines at the ready to set ablaze. But the actual news wasn't for the tabloids. It was for the family themselves. For the first time in years, the children were rid of the burden of silence. The wives were rid of the weight of his shadow. And what of Kody? He was left to combat the ruins of the life he had created, broken by the ones he believed would never betray him. The courtroom was not merely a field of law that day. It was a theater of justice. A father was tried, not by outsiders, but by his own kin. And when the last blow fell, it was not merely a verdict. It was a pronouncement. Truth always triumphs over control. Pain will always insist on being heard. And no empire based on silence can endure the voices of those who finally speak their minds. The echo of the gavel still remains. Kody Brown was torn apart, not by outsiders, but by the very children who once believed him the most. The courthouse doors groaned open, and for an instant the world paused. Journalists shifted forward on their chairs. Flashbulbs popped in staccato. Bursts and whispers flowed through the gallery in gentle waves. Everyone was aware this wasn't business as usual. It was the fall of a dynasty. And then, he walked in. Kody Brown, once the brash face of a polygamist reality TV clan, now a man entering a courtroom, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched, and eyes flicking across every corner as if the walls themselves were about to condemn him. His name was spoken for months in tabloids and on websites, but here beneath the canopy of the judge's bench, there was nowhere to hide. The silence that met him was not respect. It was not admiration. It was oppressive, glacial, the kind of silence that accompanies when individuals are waiting for the giant to fall. The courtroom was not like any other room he had ever walked into. The atmosphere was heavy, near to stifling, with an unspoken tension that clung to every wooden bench and every highly polished tile. The smell of freshly polished oak blended with the wafting scent of old coffee, left behind by anxious lawyers. Every noise echoed, shoes scuffling across the floor, papers shuffling, even the light cough of someone attempting to clear their throat. At the front of the room, the judge sat high on the bench, her black robe hanging like a curtain of power. Her eyes swept across the room with keen precision, not just looking but analyzing every aspect. She wasn't here to be entertained by the show. She was here to give justice. And already her presence commanded silence. The gallery was packed. On one side were reporters, pens ready to write tomorrow's headline. On the other were spectators, some strangers, some distant family members who had quietly taken sides long before this day came. But the real limelight wasn't on the judge, or the reporters, or the audience. It was on the family. Christine came in first, her skin pale but her gait unshaking. She was strength incarnate, clad in armor, yet the faint shiver of her hands revealed the tempest raging within. She had endured years of suffering in silence, of words unkept and love withheld. This day she came to see it all laid out before her. Then came Janelle. Her stance was rigid, arms folded tightly, as if protecting herself from the emotional shrapnel that would soon detonate in this room. She wasn't there for sympathy. She wasn't even there for vengeance. She was there for truth. Meri followed, her expression unreadable. She had mastered the art of silence, of swallowing pain until it became invisible. But deep in her eyes there was something else, a flicker of anticipation, a readiness for Kody to finally face consequences that had been long overdue. And then there was Robyn. She, unlike the rest, looked fragile, ghost-like. Her lips quivered. Her eyes flicked frantically about the room, as if she still clung to hope that someone would call this off, that someone would rescue her from the tempest that was on the verge of sweeping them all away. The wives did not sit together. They were scattered, separated by years of competition and betrayal, yet bound together by one truth. They were all present because of him. While the limelight focused on Kody, whispers ran when the children arrived. Some were adults, toughened by years of seeing their family disintegrate. Others were still young, their eyes wide with confusion, but their hearts already bearing scars too heavy for their years. They sat back of their mothers, an unseen army of witnesses. They were not here to be supporting characters any longer. They were here to say something, to be heard, to finally have a say in the story. Kody sneaked a look at them quickly, his jaw clenching as he turned away almost as fast. He knew that the words they were about to release would hurt more than the things the wives had ever spoken. With each step, the sound of his footsteps became a drumbeat. As Kody made his way to the defendant's table, he patted his suit, a suit that hugged him too tightly, too awkwardly, as if even the fabric was not willing to be accommodating. He stiffened his shoulders and tried to hold his head high, to give off the image of a man still in command, but cracks appeared. His eyes fluttered, his lips compressed, and his shoulders grew rigid under the strain of unseen shackles. He sat down slowly, his hands gripping the table as if holding on for dear life. In his mind, he replayed the arguments he had prepared, the defenses he had rehearsed. They don't understand. They never understood what it meant to lead a family this big. I'll make them see. I'll make them believe. But secretly, deep down where pride and refusal to see had coated everything like a hard shell, a kernel of fear had germinated. Because this time it wasn't his wives alone that were against him. It wasn't just the detractors online. This time it was his children. The judge brought up her gavel. The room fell silent. Even the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights appeared to become silent. The gavel descended with a crack that echoed through each of the chests in that room. It was not the beginning of a trial, but the blow of fate. The noise appeared to divide Kody's life into two. The man he once was, and the man that would soon be revealed. The judge's eyes focused on him, keen and unyielding. Her words were polite, but her tone was heavy. She had watched scores of men like him, self-assured, domineering, convinced they could warp reality to suit them. But she also knew that reality had a tendency to smash even the greatest shields. The initial minutes crept like hours. Lawyers rustled papers. The audience leaned forward, anticipating. Each look shared between family members was charged with history. Years of deception, unspoken pain, and words unuttered. Christine's fingers clutched the edge of the bench until her knuckles blanched. Janelle let out a slow breath, as if centering herself for the tempest that would break. Meri drummed her foot gently on the floor, the one visible sign of tension she permitted herself. Robyn, on the other hand, shifted constantly, her hands twisting together in an unspoken plea that maybe, just maybe, this might all turn out differently. And the children, those courageous, shattered children, sat quietly. Their eyes told stories too heavy for their mouths, stories which would soon have to be told. The expectation of their testimony charged the air like the electricity before a storm. Kody fidgeted in his seat. The pressure of the room bore down on him, crushing, relentless. He was accustomed to being in charge, to demanding attention with his booming voice and confident posture. But now, before the judge, before the eyes of his children, he was simply a man awaiting judgment. Outside the courthouse, the frenzy was no less fierce. Reporters engulfed the steps, microphones thrust into anyone even tangentially associated with the Brown family. Protesters waved signs, some decrying Kody, others inexplicably in his defense. Fans of the show pleaded for answers, for explanation, for the real truth which had long been obscured by reality TV's manipulative edits. Helicopter blades pounded overhead, shooting aerials for tonight's broadcast on the evening news. Social media sites hummed with hashtags already popularizing on the globe. #Kody on trial, #Brown family truth, #judge strikes. Within, however, the family was insulated in their bubble of angst, untroubled by the din of the world outside. For them, only voices they cared to listen to were soon to be heard. The judge requested opening statements, and the lawyers stood up. Kody sat up in his chair, warring his face into defiance. He wasn't going to show them fear, not yet, But no matter how hard he clutched his defenses, the truth hung in the air, weighing and inescapable. The wives saw it, the children saw it, and so did the judge. The courtroom had already been strained when the gavel initially fell. But as the judge summoned the very first witness, the mood shifted completely. What was once dense silence now turned into a crushing tension, as if the air itself was poised, holding its breath. And then from the rear of the courtroom he proceeded, one of Kody's sons, not a boy anymore, but nor yet hard enough to be a man. His footsteps slow, measured, and shaking slightly, all eyes in the room on him, as he walked to the witness stand. For an instant time seemed suspended, the squeaking of his shoes on the shiny wood floor the only noise. When he finally sat, the bailiff swore him in. His hands were shaking as he raised them, but his voice, though shaky at first, held. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes." The young man's gaze moved around the courtroom, his eyes settling on his mother's, then his brother's, and then tentatively, on his father. Kody's gaze was piercing, almost threatening. But the boy didn't flinch. He took a deep breath and started. "My father wasn't the man you see on television. He wasn't the man that he presented himself to be to the world. In our house, it was a different story. If you weren't doing what he said, you didn't exist." The words fell like a hammer. The audience gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and the wives exchanged pained glances. Christine's lips quivered. Janelle's eyes narrowed. Meri's chin dropped slightly, and Robyn shook her head as if trying to deny what she had just heard. Kody shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, but he remained silent. The boy continued. "He made us feel small, like we weren't people, just pieces of his scheme. If you did what he wanted, you got his attention. If you didn't, you got silence. And silence from my dad hurt more than any punishment." The son's voice trembled. Tears sparkled in his eyes, but he struggled on. The truth was stronger than his fear. The daughter's pain as he went down. The other child approached. This time a daughter, older, her face white but her back straight and determined. Her voice was heard, shaking but strong. "You all think he loved us equally, that he was some great father, juggling all of us in this big family. But that's not true. He picked favorites, he ignored the rest. And when you're a little girl who just wants her dad's attention, that kind of rejection, it breaks you." Her words hung in the air like smoke. She swallowed hard and kept going, her voice thick with emotion. "I remember sitting at the table, attempting to share with him about my day. But he didn't care. He just wanted obedience. If you questioned him, you were shut out. If you had your own thoughts, he made you feel wrong for them." Her fingers curled around the edges of the stand. "He didn't raise us to be loved. He raised us to be controlled." The gallery burst into whispers once more. Some gasps, some nods of understanding, some tears from people who knew too well. The third child, a man now, with a broader build, older, a weighty voice, advanced. He did not glance at his father initially. He had his eyes cast down, his fists gripping at his sides. When he finally voiced something, his words boomed. "My dad taught us that loyalty was the key. But his loyalty was a one-way thing. We had to obey, respect, and obey. But when we needed him, when we wanted him to just be our dad and not our dictator, he wasn't there." The courtroom fell silent. His outrage was raw, unrefined, but genuine. "I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to be proud of him. But the thing is, he was never proud of us unless we were just what he wanted. And when we weren't, he treated us like strangers in our own home." His voice cracked. He hesitated, struggling to hold back tears, then gazed at his father for the first time. "You sacrificed us. Not for family, not for love, but for control." That sentence tore through the courtroom like lightning. Even the judge leaned back. Eyebrows shot up at the impact. Christine cried openly now. Janelle shook her head, pressing her hand against her mouth. Robyn covered her face. Kody sat motionless, his lips compressed, his knuckles white from the tight hold he had on the table. But his eyes betrayed him. They glowed with fear. But it wasn't just the older kids who testified. One of the younger kids stepped forward, their voice soft but sharp in its naivety. "I just wanted him to play with me, to be with me, But he never did. He was always too busy, too mad, or with somebody else. I thought maybe I wasn't worth it. The courtroom grew quiet, so quiet that the sound of a pen hitting the floor was heard. The purity in the words stung deeper than any accusation. This wasn't about control, this was about love denied. Even the judge's expression softened as she watched the child struggle through their truth. It wasn't the testimony of an adult with grievances. It was the cry of a child still waiting for a father's love. As each child spoke, the tension in the room thickened. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, realizing they weren't just covering a trial, they were witnessing the implosion of a family dynasty. The wives changed from moment to moment, tears, scrunched fists, floor stares. Every statement reflected their own lives, affirming what they had long understood, but had sought to bear in silence. The onlookers craned forward, torn between horror and sympathy. Some shook their heads in incredulity. Others silently wept, unable to suppress their feelings as the children released their anguish into the open. And all the while Kody remained seated. His expression was calm and controlled, but his body told a different story. He breathed shallowly, his jaw locked, his eyes avoiding the eyes of those who came to testify against him. The last to testify that day was an eldest daughter. She made her way slowly to the witness stand, her hands firm, her face unemotional but determined. She did not shake, did not stutter. She gazed straight at her father and spoke with lucidity. Everyone always said family was first, but you never put your money where your mouth was. You wanted us to be a part of your narrative, but you never wanted to be a part of ours. And the thing is, you shattered this family. Dad, not us. You had. Her words didn't shatter, didn't break. They pealed like a bell in the courtroom, unmistakable, unbreakable. As she left, the silence after her was palpable. It wasn't the silence of expectation any longer. It was the silence of a man revealed, of a legacy broken. The judge finally adjourned. The gavel fell, but the sound was partially muted by the enormity of what had just been said. The kids went back to their seats, crying, clinging to the hands of their mothers. Others blankly staring into space. They had told their truths, and in telling them, they had unleashed a storm that could never be reversed. Kody sat there, his body tense, his face white. The mask was cracking, bit by bit. He had spent years convinced that his control was absolute. But here, in this courtroom, his own children had taken him apart word by word. The wives had held their children tight, their hurt collective, but their power doubling. They were no longer alone in their struggle. The children were with them now, and united, they had testified with one voice. And as the courtroom cleared for recess, one thing was certain: this was just the beginning. The children's testimony had ignited the lies, and the fire was burning rapidly. When this trial concluded, there would be nothing of the man Kody ever had to pretend to be. The gavel of the judge fell again, halting the proceedings, but the room did not quiet. The atmosphere crackled with all that the children had just let out. Their voices still resonated, ringing in the courtroom like specters who would not depart. Everyone's attention came back to the children, and away from the women who had once proudly stood as Kody's wives. This was not their time to testify. Not yet, but the intensity of their responses spoke volumes louder than any deposition could. Christine was closest to the front, her frame slightly turned toward her children, her hands shaking in her lap. The tears on her face were not of shock, they were of recognition. Each word her children had uttered echoed with the pain she had suffered in silence for years. The favoritism, the neglect, the manner in which Kody's love had become a currency to be earned, not a gift freely shared. She had suffered it as a wife, but hearing it gush from her children's mouths was a cruelty she hadn't been ready for. Her thoughts went back to long ago nights, when she sat by the dinner table alone, with a plate of food warming to waste, waiting for Kody to come home. He never did. And when he did, his focus was elsewhere, on Robyn, on the rules, on his dominance. Now, as she recalled her daughter's voice ringing in her mind, "He didn't raise us to be loved, he raised us to be controlled." Christine's tears grew heavier, her chest felt tight with guilt. She had attempted to shield them from harm, yet in the end she had done nothing, standing by silently while they endured. She wiped her face swiftly, not allowing her breakdown to become a media spectacle for the reporters scribbling behind her. But her red, swollen eyes betrayed her. Christine's pain was no longer a secret. Next to Christine was Janelle, but her response was quite different. No tears dropped from her eyes. Her jaw clenched, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. She was angry, not only at Kody, but at herself. Her children had been courageous, speaking to the court of their father's indifference, of his stifling domination, but Janelle had known it all along. She had seen it, she had struggled against it. Her memories came rushing back, feudings behind closed doors, times she had told Kody he was smothering the children under the heel of his rules. He'd waved her off, shut her down with the same condescending tone he used on everyone. Now the voice of her son boomed in her head. "You didn't sacrifice for us, you sacrificed us." She hurt, she had fought Kody, and yet it had never been enough. She had not kept them safe enough. That lingered as a guilt within her, building into a quiet rage that would soon boil over. She breathed slowly, trying to calm herself down, but her hands gave her away, tapping against her leg in a rhythm of restraint and barely controlled fury. Janelle wasn't sobbing like Christine. She wasn't numb like Meri. She was on fire. Meri sat farther down the row, her posture flawless, her hands folded quietly in her lap. On the surface, she appeared calm, serene, but anyone who was familiar with her could see the truth in the little things. The jittery tapping of her foot, the pursing of her lips into a thin line, the emptiness in her eyes. She had suffered Kody's rejection for decades, all before the rest. She lived in the background of his changing affections, quieted by his indifference. But to hear the children speak aloud what she had harbored for all those decades was to reopen a wound she believed had scabbed over. When her daughter spoke of rejection, of being invisible unless obedient, Meri's breath had caught in her throat. It was as if her child had reached across the courtroom and whispered the very words she had swallowed for years. But Meri didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she sat rigid, as if she were keeping her feelings captive. Because if she let them out, if she let one tear fall, she knew she would implode. Robyn's crumbling denial. Unlike the rest, Robyn's response was not tacit acknowledgement or repressed outrage. It was denial coming apart at the seams in real time. Her palms trembled as she pushed her hands together, her lips working in silent prayer. Tears flowed freely down her face as she hissed, "No, no, this isn't right, this isn't true." But she knew it was. Deep down, she had defended Kody for years. She had told herself he was a good father, a good leader, a man doing his best in impossible conditions. She had told herself that the breakdown of the family was due to jealousy, to disobedience, to anything but Kody himself. But listening to the children, her children lie under oath about his neglect, disabused her of that notion. Their voices spoke a truth she could no longer ignore. She wept harder, earning threatening glances from Christine and Janelle. It wasn't about her today, but Robyn couldn't help but be consumed. The life she had created, the man she had stood by, was crumbling before her, and the shame of having stood by him felt more oppressive with each sob. The wives' responses were not missed. Reporters wrote furiously, recording every tear, every raised fist, every whisper. The gallery murmured, some onlookers shaking their heads in sympathy, others staring with curious fascination. To the outside world, the sister wives were always a curiosity, a television spectacle of non-traditional love. But now they were no longer entertainment. They were women, mothers, destroyed by the wreckage of a man's pride. And for the first time, the world saw their pain not as reality television, but as reality itself. Kody sat stiffly at his table, his eyes darting between his wives. Christine's tears made him scowl. Janelle's anger made him shift uncomfortably. Meri's silence unnerved him, her stillness more damning than any outburst. And Robyn's sobbing, loud, unrestrained, filled him with both frustration and shame. He longed to yell, to protect himself, to make them all remember the concessions he had made, but he couldn't. Not yet. The judge's gaze was on him, the world's cameras poised. His silence wasn't control any longer, it was survival. Divided by decades of competition and deception, the wives found common ground in that moment: guilt. All of them in different ways had let this happen. They had put up with his abuse. made excuses for him, protected their children where they could, but never put an end to the pattern at all. Now seeing their children cry on the stand, they all wondered the same thing.
Did I do enough?
Could I have prevented this earlier? The reality was bitter. None of them had succeeded in rescuing their children from Kody's shadow, and that was what held them together, stronger than any marriage vow ever could. The judge saw it all, the pain of the children, the reaction of the wives, Kody's falling mask. Even though her expression was professional, the eyes softened as they looked at the women. She knew. She had witnessed it before. Families broken by the control of one man, mothers with the choice of survival or conflict. Her gavel had not yet fallen for judgment, but already the scales were tipping. The children's testimony had started the fire. The wives' responses were the smoke that confirmed it was happening. When the judge finally asked the court to proceed, the wives smoothed out in their seats, trying to collect themselves. Christine wiped away her tears. Janelle relaxed her fists. Meri took a deep breath, anchoring her rigid mask. Robyn buried her face in a handkerchief, still shaking, but too late. Their responses had been telling. The children's realities were no longer hearsay. They were lived experiences, verified in the eyes of the women who had suffered the same hurt. And as the court was set to proceed, one thing was certain. The cohesion of the wives once shattered was quietly reconstituting, not for Kody, not for marriage, but for their children. Together though divided, they had witnessed the collapse of Kody Brown's authority, and together they would see it through to the end. The courtroom had been seared by the children's words. Their hurt hung in the air, thick and unshakable, like smoke after flame. Reporters had written down each tear, each accusation. The wives had silently attested to the truth with their expressions. The gallery had gasped and whispered, unable to keep their shock silent. And then came the moment everyone had been anticipating. The defense called Kody Brown to the stand. Kody stood up from his chair slowly, each muscle rigid as though burdened with the weight of the world. His suit, once selected to convey power, now felt constricting. His tie was too tight, his collar strangled him. Every step towards the podium reverberated through the courtroom, not with force, but with fear. The children's eyes pierced him like daggers. The stares of his wives burned his skin. The judge examined him with tranquil authority, her face inscrutable but her back stiff, prepared to pierce through any act. As he finally sat down, the bailiff administered the oath. His voice broke a little, as he pronounced, "I do." This was his opportunity, his final opportunity, to save his name, his power, his family. He leaned forward, gripping the edges of the stand, as though it might anchor him. His voice was loud at first, defiant, trying to reclaim control. "I've heard enough lies today, enough exaggerations. I'm not the monster they're painting me to be." The words hovered in the air, but they didn't stick the way he had hoped. His wives edged in their seats. His children's faces turned hard. The judge cocked her head, unmoved. He continued, his voice acrimonious. "Do you have any idea what it's like to run a family this large? Do you have any idea the sacrifices I made? I sacrificed my life, my energy, my soul, on keeping this family whole. All I did, all I dictated, was to keep them safe." His voice increased in volume, in urgency. He wasn't speaking as a man telling the truth. He was speaking as a drowning man, flailing for breath. Christine shook her head, tears running freely. Janelle scoffed out loud. She could not help herself. The gallery whispered, the disbelief mounting with every word. In the gallery, his eldest son rose, his voice cracking with anger. "Protect us? You didn't protect us. You abandoned us." The courtroom exploded. Gasp filled the air. The wives turned, eyes wide with shock. Even the judge slammed her gavel. "Order, order in this courtroom," she thundered. But the harm was already done. The son's words had broken through the mask. Kody's defense was disintegrating before it ever started. Red-faced, Kody attempted to recover. He spoke loudly, in an effort to keep the whispers at bay. "You don't know. None of you know what it was like to be me. I was out there, laboring, providing, ensuring there was food, ensuring there was shelter, ensuring our family didn't fall apart under the world's pressure. And yeah, perhaps I wasn't perfect. Perhaps I wasn't always present. But I did it all for them." His voice cracked. For an instant, his tone changed, not anger but urgency. His eyes misted. His breathing accelerated. I loved my children. I loved my wives. I gave everything I could. And what do I get in return? Betrayal. Lies. They take my sacrifices and turn them into weapons against me. For a split second, silence followed. Some spectators leaned forward, unsure if they were hearing the confession of a broken man or the manipulation of one who had lost control. Christine's voice cut through the silence, loud enough for everyone to hear, though she wasn't on the stand. Sacrifice? You call ignoring your children sacrifice? You call punishing us with silence love? Her words rang across the courtroom. Janelle added sharply, you didn't build us up. You broke us down. The wives' interruptions weren't allowed to occur, but the judge gave them a moment, perhaps sensing their voices were also included in this trial. Kody's face contorted with rage. His facade of calm cracked further. You're distorting everything. You always distort everything. I gave you command, and you call it control. I gave you regulations, and you call it chains. I gave you sacrifice, and you call it abandonment. His voice was poison now, spat through clenched teeth. The judge brought down her gavel a second time, her voice thundering. Mr. Brown, this is not your pulpit. This is not your TV show. This is a courtroom. Calm down, or I will stop this testimony in its tracks. Her severity startled him. He gasped, making himself sit up straighter, lower his voice, but the fury still smoldered in his eyes. He drew a breath, dropping his voice into something that was supposed to sound sincere. I know I wasn't perfect. I know I messed up, but everything that I did because of love. Maybe it didn't appear to be the love they imagined. Maybe I wasn't the dad they envisioned. But I was there. I provided them with discipline. I provided them with strength. And one day they'll realize. His voice was almost begging now. His hands shook as he spoke. He was no longer emitting authority. He was pleading for forgiveness. But the courtroom wasn't impressed. The children looked back at him, unblinking. The wives shook their heads. The gallery grumbled. Even the judge's eyes softened a little. But her expression was still unyielding. The eldest daughter stood up suddenly, her voice even but highly exacting. No, Dad. You did not give us strength. You gave us fear. You did not give us structure. You gave us walls. And you did not give us love. You gave us conditions. The words cut through the courtroom. Kody went white. He opened his mouth, and no sound emerged. For the first time, he was speechless. Not out of control, not in power, but because there was nothing left to say. The ensuing silence was complete. Even the judge permitted it to stay, as though the truth must have room to breathe. At last, the judge leaned forward, her tone strict but firm. This testimony has gone far enough. What we've heard today is not a defense, desperation. And while Mr. Brown has spoken, it is evident that this court has been given two truths: the lived pain of his children, and the crumbling justifications of a man not willing to confront them. Her words sealed the moment. The gavel struck again. The courtroom breathed a sigh, but tension still lingered. The wives sat upright. The kids clung to each other, and Kody slumped back in his chair, a broken man. The world outside would afterwards dispute whether Kody's tears were authentic, if his words were true. Some would claim he was a man misunderstood, defeated by the unattainable burden of guiding a family too big to contain. Others would claim he was revealed for what he really was: a man who confused control for love and lost it all because of it. But within the courtroom, from the people who knew him best, there was no question. His futile defense only reinforced what they already understood. Kody Brown was not the man he portrayed himself to be. The courtroom was still so still that the buzzing of the lights above sounded deafening. Each word uttered by Kody's kids still lingered in the room. Each cry, each torn sentence, each plea of neglect and control hung like ghosts loath to depart. Kody sat slumped in his chair, his pale face, his rumpled suit. The wives had gone back to their seats, after gazing upon his frantic effort to defend himself, dissolve into chaos. The children, some shaking, some clutched by their mothers, sat staring ahead, wide, tear-stained eyes. All eyes turned to one figure now. The judge. She sat forward on the bench, hands clasped, eyes steady. She had heard all the testimony, all the defense, all the outburst of feeling. And now she was to have her say, not as a parent, not as a wife, not as a child, but as the voice of justice. Her gown fell in folds around her, the gavel at her side like a sword of veracity. When she spoke, the power of justice itself was in her voice. This court has heard enough. The statement sliced through the room, cutting the tension like a blade. The judge's eyes softened as she faced the children. Your courage today will not be overlooked. It is a tremendous act of courage to confront not just the public, not just the cameras, but to confront your own father. Your words have been heard, and your truths are now a part of this record forever. Tears streamed down Christine's face as she hugged her daughter close. Janelle took her son's hand in hers, holding it fast. Even Meri, who had been quiet for much of the trial, closed her eyes, relief pouring over her. The children stiffened. For years they had been silenced, their emotions discounted as rebellion or weakness. Now the ultimate authority figure in the room had legitimized their suffering. The judge then turned her attention to the wives. I have seen all of you sit in this courtroom, replaying years of struggle. You have weathered silence. You have weathered control. And you have weathered betrayal. Today you have not only stood as individuals, but as mothers who have kept their children safe, even in your quietest moments. Christine wept openly. Janelle's eyes welled. Meri, still impassive, finally let a lone tear slip. Robyn held a tissue to her face, trembling. You entered into this family with a belief in love, in togetherness, in something greater than yourselves. But what was promised to you wasn't delivered. This court sees the anguish you have endured, and the bravery it took to bring it here. The wives glanced at each other. For years they had been at war with each other, over jealousy, favoritism, and competition. But here in the courtroom, the words of the judge united them in something greater than marriage, survival. Finally the judge looked at Kody. Her eyes narrowed, unyielding, the weight of authority crushing him like a hammer. He gazed back slowly, his face white, his lips shaking. You entered this courtroom, thinking you could defend yourself on the basis of words of sacrifice, on the basis of allegations of leadership, on the basis of explanations of control. But what I have heard is not leadership. It is not sacrifice. It is abandonment. It is silence. It is pain. Her voice increased in volume, power, filling every corner of the room. You created a family not of love, but of conditions. You asked for loyalty, but never gave any back. You silenced those who relied upon you. And today, the very voices you tried so hard to shut up have brought down the image you tried so hard to defend. Kody's chest heaved and fell rapidly. He shook his head slightly, forming the word no, but no sound came out. His power was lost. The judge grasped her gavel, its firmness in her hand. This court finds that the words of these children are truth. This court finds that the wives, who are separated by circumstance, are one in suffering, and their testimony stands as truth. And this court finds that your defense, Mr. Brown, is mere denial in the presence of inescapable fact. Her statements struck like thunder. Each word was a blow before the gavel even hit. Thus this court dismisses your assertions. Your story is done. Your legacy, as you've sought to maintain it, has been decimated by the same individuals you were supposed to be defending. And then, in a single motion, the gavel hit. The clap echoed throughout the room, final and definitive. The wives gasped, their bodies shaking with the release of decades of tension. Christine leaned into her daughter, softly repeating, "It's over, it's finally over." Janelle closed her eyes and breathed out slowly, a weight she had carried for decades at last lifting. Meri brushed away her single tear, her face relaxing for the first time. Robyn fell into her seat, crying uncontrollably. The children hugged each other, sobbing, some of them speechless, just stunned. They had said their truth, and the judge had pronounced it as irrefutable. For the first time, their voices had not only been heard, they had been believed. He sat motionless. His hands shook. His mouth quivered. His eyes scanned the room for anyone who would still stand up for him. But nobody did. Not his wives. Not his children. Not even Robyn, whose tears no longer protected him but accused him. For the first time, Kody Brown was totally utterly alone. The bailiff requested recess. The gallery stood, reporters rushing for quotes, pens racing across their notepads. The family did not hurry though. Christine stood first, embracing her daughter. Janelle stood firm, folding her children into her arms. Meri was next, her face rock solid, her pace solid. Robyn came last, blotting her tears, her children holding fast to her side. They emerged together, not as sister wives anymore, but as mothers, survivors, guardians of their children. The cameras outside recorded the moment, flashes bursting like firecrackers as the women and children walked out the doors. The world would witness it, headlines would yell it, but for them, it was not about the world. It was about freedom. Within Kody sat. His hands were over his face, his body spasming with silent tears. The courtroom cleared out around him, the sound of movement dying into stillness. When he finally dropped his hands, they were bloodshot, his face red and puffy. He gazed at the vacant benches, at the door through which his family had just exited. An understanding hit him like a blow to the gut. They had vanished, not only physically, not only emotionally, they had vanished for good. In the courtrooms, the judge remained seated quietly, her robe still on her shoulders. She had heard many cases throughout her career, but few weighed as heavily as this case. This wasn't merely a trial, it was the downfall of a family dynasty. It was evidence that silence could be shattered, control could be defied, truth could emerge after decades of oppression. Her words would be remembered, not only by the Brown family, but by all of us who saw our own battles mirrored in that courtroom. The courthouse doors swung shut behind the children and wives, closing off the din of cameras and questions. They emerged into the sunlight, their futures unknown but their shackles unbroken. Kody was left in the shadows, his empire destroyed, his legacy shattered by the same voices he had once sought to silence. And as the sound of the gavel receded, one thing became indisputable. The family was broken, but out of the ashes a new future had been rewritten, one that was free from Kody's grasp, one founded on reality, one founded on liberty.